In March of 1904, on an underground iron property outside Hibbing, Minnesota, a crew was driving a crosscut at the 320-foot level. The ground was soft hematite, the kind of ore that came out of the Mesabi with a shovel where other districts needed powder. The shift boss was a Finn named Erik Maki, who had worked that level for 8 months and knew the face by the sound of it. That shift, the sound changed. The drill went in easy and then dropped. Maki stopped the round, opened the hole with a bar, and put his carbide lamp into a void that was not on any company plan. Behind the wall was a working. Not a fissure, not a pocket, not an old prospect shaft, a chamber roughly 40 feet across, with a roof broken away in uneven planes and a floor buried under 2 feet of loose rubble. The ore had been taken out of it. There was no timbering anywhere in it. There were no marks of steel or powder on the walls, no drill holes, no bit scoring, no fresh half-round sockets of the kind a charge leaves behind. The rock had been broken some other way. In places it was blackened and cracked in the shattered pattern stone takes when it has been heated hard and then thrown with water. And lying on the rubble were stones, river cobbles, oval, 1.5 hands across, cut with a groove around the circumference for a lashing, and battered flat and splayed at the working ends. Maki brought 11 of them up. The heaviest weighed about 22 pounds. The mine captain, a Cornishman named Rowe, went down that same day, spent about an hour below, took no measurements that anyone saw, and gave the order to wall off the opening and carry the crosscut around it, offsetting 40 feet north of the design line. The shift report for that date records that an old working was encountered and that a delay of 1.5 shifts resulted. Nothing else. No dimensions, no description, no mention of the stones. He laid them out on the plat table at the dry house, and the day shift came through and looked at them before they went down. The 11 stones went to the company office in Duluth with the weekly returns. They do not appear in any inventory. 3 things came out of it: a length of crosscut that swings north for no stated reason and comes back, a page in a mine journal carrying 2 lines and the word old, and a man who said for the rest of his life that somebody had taken the ore off that level before they got there, and that whoever did it had worked with stone and with fire. The credibility of the account depends entirely on what kind of men were standing in that crosscut, and the Mesabi in 1904 was worked by a very specific population. The underground crews were Finns, Slovenes, Croatians, Italians and Cornish, in that rough order, most of them within a few years of arriving. The Cornish held the captaincies because they came out of a tin mining tradition that went back centuries, and the companies trusted them. The Finns held a great many of the shift boss positions because they were reliable underground and because they organized, which the companies did not like and could not do without. These were men who read rock for a living, in a district where the ore was soft enough that the ground moved, and the timbering was what stood between a crew and the back coming down on them. A shift boss on a soft ore level was responsible for whether the back stayed up over his crew, and he knew the difference between a natural cavity and a stope by the shape of the walls, because being wrong about that killed people. The second thing to understand is the reporting structure. A mine in 1904 was not a public works project. It was private property operated by a company that had every reason to keep production moving, and no reason at all to invite a delay, an inspection, or a claim. The men were paid by the shift and replaced without paperwork. The company owned the housing, and a man who made trouble was not fired so much as simply not put on the board the next morning, and a man not on the board was a man whose family had 30 days in the house. A crew that broke into something strange told the captain, and then it went out of their hands. What they did after that was talk among themselves, in Finnish, in a sauna or a hall the company did not own, and it stayed inside that community for decades. Which is the only reason any of it survives, not in a report, but in a family. The stones Maki carried up are the part of the account that can be checked against the archaeological record, and they check out precisely. What he described, a river cobble, oval, pecked with a groove around its circumference to take a withe or a rawhide lashing, battered and splayed at one or both ends, is a grooved stone maul. It is one of the most common and most thoroughly documented artifacts in the entire Lake Superior region. They have been recovered by the tens of thousands. They come out of gardens and gravel pits and lake shores across the upper lakes, and they were common enough in the 19th century that mining companies used them as doorstops. They are in the museum collections of Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin. They were turned up by farmers and by mining companies through the whole 19th century, and there is no controversy whatsoever about what they are or who made them. They are prehistoric mining tools. The weight Maki reported is also right. The mauls run from a few pounds to well over 20, and the heavy ones were not swung by hand. They were slung or hafted and driven, and the working ends are destroyed exactly the way he described. The second detail matters as much. Blackened rock cracked in a shattered pattern, with no drill holes anywhere. That is the signature of fire setting, which is the oldest hard rock mining method there is, and was used on every continent before explosives. A fire is built against the face and fed for hours, sometimes overnight, until the rock is hot well back from the surface, and then the face is quenched with water, and the thermal shock cracks it apart along planes that no tool made. The broken rock is then barred and hammered away, and the fire is rebuilt. It leaves reddened and sooted stone, it leaves no boreholes, and it leaves rubble on the floor. Every element of what Maki reported belongs to a single coherent technology, and it is not a technology anybody in Minnesota was using in 1904. The question is not whether prehistoric people mined in this region. That is settled. The question is what they were doing 320 feet under Hibbing. Because prehistoric mining on Lake Superior is not a fringe claim, and this is the point at which most people who have not looked into it are surprised. On Isle Royale, in the middle of Lake Superior, and along the Keweenaw Peninsula on the Michigan shore, there are thousands of ancient mining pits. They are on the maps. They were being described by geologists in the 1840s, when the modern copper rush arrived and found that the best outcrops had already been located and worked. The pits follow the native copper veins with an accuracy the 19th century prospectors found useful. More than one modern mine was opened by following ancient workings down, which is to say the 19th century industry used prehistoric prospecting as a survey and said so in print at the time. Some of the pits are shallow depressions, some go down 20 feet and more into solid rock, following a vein, with the spoils stacked beside the collar where it was thrown out. In them and around them are the mauls, abandoned in place in numbers, along with charcoal from fire setting and timbers, and the occasional worked mass of copper left where it was cut loose and never moved. The dating puts the main period of this work thousands of years ago, in the Archaic, which makes it among the oldest sustained metal extraction anywhere in the world. What is disputed is scale. Popular accounts throw around enormous tonnages for how much copper was removed, and those figures do not survive contact with the professional literature. The serious estimates are far smaller, and the methods behind the big numbers are poor. But the existence of the industry is not in question by anyone. Ancient people in this specific region located ore bodies, drove workings into hard rock with fire and stone, and did it for a very long time. Which raises the objection that has kept the Hibbing account from ever being taken seriously, and it is a good objection. The objection is this: copper on Lake Superior occurs native as metal in the rock, in pieces ranging from grains to masses of many tons. It does not have to be smelted. It can be cut, hammered, annealed, and worked cold into tools and ornaments by people with no furnace and no knowledge of metallurgy. And that is exactly what the archaic peoples of the upper lakes did with it. That is why they mined it. Iron is a completely different matter. The hematite of the Mesabi is not metal. It is an oxide, and to get iron out of it, a culture needs a furnace capable of sustained high temperature, a reducing atmosphere, flux, and a body of technical knowledge that took the old world several thousand years to assemble. No pre-contact society in North America smelted iron. Not one. There is no debate about this, and no serious evidence to the contrary. So a prehistoric working 320 feet down in an iron formation makes no sense on its face. There is nothing at the bottom of that hole that anybody without a blast furnace could use as metal, and the effort involved, driving a chamber 40 feet across through rock using fire and stone hammers at that depth without timbering, is enormous. It is the kind of effort a society only makes for something it values very highly, and it is effort that has to be organized, men fed, water carried, fires supplied with wood at depth, spoil moved, all of it sustained over seasons. Which is the right way to frame the question? And it is the question that Maki's account was never asked, because everybody who heard it assumed the people down there had been after iron. They were not after iron. Hematite is worth digging for a completely different reason, and it has been dug for that reason in the Americas for longer than almost anything else people have dug for. Ground hematite is red ochre. It is pigment, and it is the oldest material in the human record that people went out of their way to obtain. It is on cave walls, in burials, on tools, on hides, on bodies, across every inhabited continent, going back tens of thousands of years. Further back than agriculture, further back than pottery, further back than the bow. In North America it moved across the continent along the same networks that carried marine shell inland and Lake Superior copper south. Red ochre burial is a defining practice of the archaic in the Great Lakes, the same period, the same region, and in many cases the same sites as the copper. Ochre is not decoration in any trivial sense. It appears in graves packed around bodies and grave goods, in quantities that had to be quarried, transported, and processed deliberately. And the quarrying is documented. At the Powers II site in Platte County, Wyoming, archaeologists have excavated a red ochre quarry that was worked by Paleo-Indian people beginning something like 12,000 years ago, with tools and points left in the deposit, making it one of the oldest known quarry sites in the Americas. People dug iron oxide out of the ground in North America. They did it for a very long time. They did it in organized ways, and they did it because the material mattered to them enormously. Whether anybody did it 320 feet under what became Hibbing is not proven, and cannot now be proven. What is proven is that the reason such a working would exist is not exotic at all, and that the objection which buried Maki's account for a century, that nobody would mine iron, was answering a question nobody was asking. Which leaves the 11 stones, and where they went. The stones left the property on a company wagon with the weekly returns and arrived at the Duluth office, and after that the record for them is a sequence of people who looked and stopped looking. The office clerk who signed for the week's shipment in 1904 was Albert Sundquist, and his receipt book, which survives in a county collection, lists the returns and adds a line for a box of samples from the level, unweighed. That is the last document that certainly refers to them. In 1931, a state geologist named Raymond Voss, compiling a survey of abandoned and consolidated underground workings on the eastern range, noticed the unexplained 40-foot offset in the 1904 crosscut, and wrote to the successor company asking whether the deviation had been caused by an obstruction and whether any record of it existed. He received a reply stating that the property had changed hands twice and that the early records were incomplete. Voss noted the exchange in a footnote in his report and did not pursue it. He died in 1958. His survey is still cited. The footnote has never been followed up by anyone. In 1954, an archaeologist named Helen Brandt, then working on old copper material at a Minnesota institution, was told the Maki story by a member of the family and wrote to 2 mining companies and to the State Historical Society, asking after a box of stone artifacts recovered from an iron property in 1904. All 3 replied that they held no such material. One of the 2 companies noted that its predecessor's sample collections had been dispersed at an unspecified date. Brandt published nothing on it. In 1978, an archivist named Margaret Olin, processing a donation of mining company papers at a county historical society, catalogued a bound mine journal for the 1903 to 1905 period, and flagged the entry for March 1904 with the phrase "old working" in her descriptive note. The journal is still on the shelf. In 2001, a retired equipment operator named Paul Maki, a great-grandson of the shift boss, wrote to the corporate successor asking whether any early sample collections from the Hibbing properties had been retained. He received a courteous reply, directing him to the State Historical Society, which had already said no in 1954. There is a reason no one can go and settle this, and it is not that access has been refused. It is that the ground itself no longer exists. Underground iron mining on the Mesabi was a brief phase. The ore body lay close to the surface across enormous areas, and by the 1910s the economics had shifted decisively to open-pit extraction, which meant stripping the overburden and taking the ore from above in benches, on a scale that has no real precedent. The whole Rust Mahoning pit at Hibbing swallowed the early underground workings, along with everything else in its way. It is more than 3 miles long and over a mile wide and hundreds of feet deep, and it is still there, and what it removed is not damaged or buried, but simply gone, hauled out and shipped down the lakes and turned into steel a century ago. The town of Hibbing itself was in the way. Between roughly 1919 and 1921, the community was physically relocated south, buildings and all, because the ore ran under it and the ore was worth more than the location. That is a matter of public record, and it is one of the strangest facts in American municipal history. A town was moved so a hole could be made bigger. Whatever was at the 320-foot level went into that hole. The chamber, the walls, the rubble floor, the fire-cracked rock, the crosscut that swung 40 feet north to avoid it, all of it was mined out and carried away in ore cars by men who had no idea they were removing anything but iron. There is no site to excavate. There is no bulkhead to open. There is a pit, and a set of documents, and 11 stones that were last certainly accounted for in a clerk's receipt book in 1904. What is known is small, and it is entirely on paper. A shift report for March 1904, recording an old working and a delay of 1.5 shifts. A mine journal page with 2 lines and the word "old," catalogued in 1978 and still on a shelf in a county collection. A receipt book listing a box of samples, unweighed. A state geologist's footnote from 1931 noting an offset in a crosscut, and a company reply that the early records were incomplete. 3 letters written in 1954 and answered in the negative. 1 letter written in 2001 and answered by referral. What is not known is everything that matters. Nobody knows how far the chamber ran, or how deep the rubble went, or what was under it, or how old the workings were, or whether the 11 stones were the whole of what was on that floor, or the 11 that a shift boss could carry. Erik Maki worked underground another 19 years, went to the open pits when the underground closed, and died in 1937. He told the account to his family in Finnish and in English, and it did not change between tellings. He never claimed to know who had been down there. He said only that the ore was gone and that the marks were not made by steel. The grooved malls he described sit by the thousand in museum drawers across 3 states, and the ancient pits on Isle Royal and the Keweenaw are still on the maps and still uncontested, and the practice of quarrying iron oxide for ochre in the Americas is documented back 12,000 years. Every part of the account is ordinary except for where it happened. The one place it could have been tested was cut out of the earth in benches and shipped away as ore, and the town that stood over it was moved out of the way first. There is nothing left at Hibbing to dig. There is only the question of how many other levels were walled off and carried around, on how many properties, in how many districts, by captains who had a schedule to keep and no reason to write down more than 2 lines and the word old.